The train wailed like a dying animal as it bled steam into the Arizona heat. For Alina Vance, that sound was supposed to be a trumpet fanfare, the start of a new life. She stood on the splintered platform, a Boston lady in a wilting dress, clutching her worn-out bag and a heart full of carefully folded hopes. He was there, Jedediah Croft, tall and handsome, just like the photograph. But the smile from the picture was gone. In its place was a sneer that soured the air, a look of pure disgust. His eyes raked over her, from her dark auburn hair to the tips of her sensible boots, and he didn't even try to hide his disappointment. The whole town was watching. They'd all come to see the mail-order bride, the fancy lady from back east who was marrying into the Croft dynasty. His voice, when it came, wasn't a whisper. It was a proclamation, a verdict for the whole world to hear. "You're not what I ordered." Humiliation hit her like a physical blow, hot and sharp. The world went blurry, shrinking to the space of her own shame. She could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd, the cruel snickers from the cowhands standing behind Jedediah. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a spectacle, and she was the main attraction. She tried to speak, to salvage a single shred of her dignity. "Mr. Croft, there must be some mistake. Your letters—" He cut her off with a harsh, barking laugh. "My letters?" He shot a look past her, toward a man stepping out of the station master's office. This man was older, broader, with a face like a block of granite and eyes as cold and hard as river stones. He wore a tailored suit that screamed money and power. This had to be the patriarch. Silas Croft. "My father handles the correspondence," Jedediah sneered, enjoying every second of her agony. "He's the one who needs a broodmare for the Croft line, not me. But I'm the one who has to look at you over the breakfast table. And I won't." The word broodmare hung in the air, ugly and obscene. She wasn't a person. She was livestock. Silas Croft stormed forward, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Jedediah, we had an agreement. This is a respectable young woman from a good family." "She's a pauper whose father left her with nothing but debts," Jedediah shot back, his rebellion fueled by the audience. "You bought her like you buy cattle, father. Well, this bull ain't taking this heifer." Alina's composure finally shattered. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She was stranded, penniless, thousands of miles from home, being argued over like a piece of property. Her dream of a new life was turning into a nightmare right before her eyes. She had to run. But where? The sheriff, a weary man with a tin star, just watched from the edge of the platform, his hand on his hip. He knew better than to cross the Crofts. No one stepped forward. No one offered a hand. Her isolation was absolute. And that's when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see another gaping face, another pair of pitying eyes. But it wasn't a townsfolk. It was him. He'd been there the whole time, leaning against a support pillar, a silent observer in the middle of the chaos. An Apache warrior. His face was a mask of stoicism, his dark eyes unreadable. They weren't looking at her with pity or scorn. They seemed to be looking right through the humiliation to the woman underneath. He moved with a startling, fluid grace, pushing off the pillar and walking directly into the charged space between her and the Crofts. The crowd fell silent. A native warrior walking into a white family's dispute? This was unheard of. It was dangerous. He stopped right in front of her, ignoring Jedediah and his furious father completely. His gaze was fixed on her. Then slowly, deliberately, he held out his hand, palm up. It was an invitation, a lifeline. Her Boston upbringing screamed at her to recoil. This was a savage, the subject of terrifying stories whispered back east. Accepting his hand was social suicide. It was probably physical suicide. But then she looked at Jedediah's cruel smirk. She looked at Silas Croft's possessive glare. She looked at the faces in the crowd, hungry for her downfall. She realized she had nothing left to lose. Her reputation was already ashes. Her future was a terrifying blank page. His hand was calloused and strong. It promised nothing but an escape from this single unbearable moment. It was a choice between the hell she knew and a wilderness she didn't. With a deep, shuddering breath that was half a sob and half a gasp of defiance, Alina Vance placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a firm, secure grip. Without a word, he turned and began to lead her away from the platform. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, a wave of stunned, disbelieving faces. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Silas Croft bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip. "Unhand her, you heathen!" The Apache warrior didn't pause. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, pulling Alina gently but firmly with him, away from the ruins of her life. "Let him have her," Jedediah scoffed, his voice dripping with a final, cruel poison. "Looks like she's found her own level after all." The words chased her as they stepped onto the dusty main street. Alina didn't look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the strong, straight back of the silent man, leading her into the terrifying, uncharted territory of a new beginning. Every window she passed held a pair of staring eyes. The whispers followed them, a swarm of invisible insects buzzing in the thick, dusty air. A white woman, a lady, being led away by an Apache. The scandal was a living, breathing thing. Alina's mind was a tornado of fear and adrenaline, but the hand holding hers was a steady anchor. He didn't seem to notice the stares, or if he did, he was completely indifferent to them. His focus was singular, forward. They walked past the blacksmith's forge, where the ringing hammer fell silent. They passed the livery, where men stopped their work mid-motion, mouths agape. They were heading to the edge of town, where the buildings grew sparse and the vast, intimidating landscape of rock and scrub began to take over. He led her to a tethered horse, a lean, wiry Mustang that watched them with intelligent, dark eyes. He stopped and finally turned to face her. He gestured with his free hand, first to the horse, then to the vast, open country stretching out beyond the town. The question was clear, even without a single word. "Are you coming?" This was her last chance. She could turn back. She could run to the sheriff's office or the church and throw herself on their mercy. But the memory of their faces on the platform was still a fresh, stinging wound. They had all just stood there. They had watched her fall and done nothing. This stranger, this supposed savage, was the only one who had offered her a hand. She looked at the horse, then back into his unreadable face and gave a single firm nod. He acknowledged it with a slight dip of his chin. In one fluid motion, he swung himself into the saddle. Then he reached down for her. She hesitated, her dress and petticoats a ridiculous, cumbersome cage. He waited, his patience a silent, solid thing. Awkwardly, she placed her foot on his, and with a strength that shocked her, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her sideways in front of him. The proximity was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. His body was a wall of solid warmth behind her. She could feel the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing. He clucked his tongue, and the horse moved into a smooth, ground-eating trot, leaving Redemption Gulch and its judgment behind them in a cloud of dust. They rode for what felt like an eternity. The sun beat down, and the world transformed around them. Dusty plains gave way to rugged canyons of rust-colored rock and towering mesas that clawed at the sky. Alina had never imagined a place so empty, yet so full of a fierce, raw beauty. The silence between them was absolute, broken only by the plodding of the horse's hooves and the lonely cry of a hawk circling high above. Slowly, minute by minute, her panic began to recede. It was replaced by a profound exhaustion and a dawning, sharp-edged curiosity. Who was this man? The stories they told in Boston were of brutal raids and savage warfare, but there was nothing savage in the gentle way he guided the horse, nothing brutal in the steady way he held her secure against him. He seemed a part of this land, moving with it, not against it. She realized she didn't even know his name. He was just a presence, a quiet strength that had pulled her from the wreckage of her life. Just as dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, he guided the horse down a narrow, almost invisible trail. It led into a small, secluded canyon, a hidden sanctuary with a thin ribbon of a creek trickling through its center, lined with cottonwood trees. Tucked beneath a massive rock overhang, almost perfectly camouflaged against the stone, was a small, crude cabin. It wasn't a teepee or a wickiup. It was a solid-looking structure of timber and mud with a stone chimney and a single glass window. It looked permanent. He dismounted, then lifted her down. Her legs were so stiff she nearly buckled, but he caught her elbow, holding her steady until she found her balance. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. He unsaddled the horse, led it to the creek to drink, and then set it to graze on a patch of sparse grass. He disappeared into the cabin for a moment and came out with a small axe. Alina stood there awkwardly, clutching her carpet bag, feeling utterly useless. She was a woman trained in needlepoint and piano, in managing a household staff she no longer had. She knew nothing of this world, nothing of survival. He returned with a small pile of firewood and went back inside. A few minutes later, a thin, welcoming curl of smoke rose from the chimney. He appeared in the doorway and gestured for her to come inside. Stepping over the threshold was like entering another world. The cabin was a single room, but it was meticulously clean and organized. A simple cot with a wool blanket was against one wall. A rough-hewn table and two stools stood in the center. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, with a few pots and a skillet hanging beside it. In a corner, hides were carefully folded next to tools for tanning and carving. It was the home of a man who lived a solitary, self-sufficient life, a life of purpose. He gestured for her to sit on one of the stools while he moved to the fireplace. He added some dried herbs and what looked like jerky to a pot of water and set it over the fire. Soon a savory, comforting aroma filled the small space. He worked in complete silence, and Alina just watched, her mind a storm of unspoken questions. Who are you? Why did you help me? What happens now? The words were trapped in her throat. Even if she could ask, would he understand? Would he even answer? When the stew was ready, he ladled it into two wooden bowls and placed one in front of her, along with a carved wooden spoon. He sat opposite her and began to eat. Hesitantly, she took a bite. It was simple food, but it was hot and nourishing. She realized she hadn't eaten since dawn, and she devoured every last drop. When they finished, he took the bowls, washed them in a bucket of water, and set them aside. The quiet, deliberate rhythm of his domesticity was strangely calming. He wasn't a threat. He was a protector. But why? Why her? Night fell completely, enveloping the canyon in a profound darkness and an even deeper silence. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced on the walls. Tala, she'd finally learned his name, having overheard a passing scout call it out once in town, took one of the thick wool blankets from the cot and offered it to her. Then he pointed to the cot itself. His meaning was clear. It was for her. Where will you sleep? She asked. Her voice was a rough whisper, the first words she had spoken since that horrible moment on the platform. He didn't seem to understand the words, or maybe he just ignored them. He simply took a folded hide from the corner, laid it on the floor on the other side of the hearth, and settled down upon it, turning his back to her to give her a small measure of privacy. Alina stood frozen. This man, this heathen, as Silas Croft had called him, had offered her his food, his fire, and now his bed, all without asking for a single thing in return. He had shown her more decency and honor in a few hours than the so-called civilized men of Redemption Gulch had shown her at all. She slowly lay down on the cot, pulling the surprisingly soft blanket up to her chin. She was still wearing her dress, a fragile piece of armor against this strange new world. She lay there listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint, steady sound of his breathing. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a small sliver of peace settled in her soul. She was no longer Alina Vance, the rejected mail-order bride from Boston. She didn't know who she was anymore. But for the first time that day, she felt safe. As sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of the silent Apache warrior sleeping on the floor, a guardian in the darkness. But she had a gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. Men like Silas Croft didn't just let things go. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Back in Redemption Gulch, the sun was down, but Silas Croft's fury was burning hotter than ever. The saloon, usually a loud, raucous place, was quiet. Men nursed their whiskeys and spoke in low tones, all of them aware that the town's most powerful man was on the warpath. Silas stormed into the sheriff's office, his face a mask of purple rage. Sheriff Thomas Brody didn't even look up from the report he was writing. He was a man who had seen too much to be easily rattled. That's savage, Silas spat, the words like venom. He kidnapped my son's intended bride in broad daylight, Brody, and you just stood there. Brody carefully blotted the ink on his report before finally looking up, his eyes weary. Silas, what I saw was a woman who was publicly and cruelly humiliated. I saw a man offer her his hand, and I saw her take it, of her own free will. There was no struggle. That's not kidnapping. She's a delicate woman from the East. She was frightened, manipulated. He's taken advantage of her. Silas slammed his fist on the desk, rattling the inkwell. I want a posse. I want you to hunt him down, bring her back, and I want that Apache's scalp hanging from my stable door. I can't form a posse for a kidnapping that didn't happen, Brody said calmly, his voice infuriatingly steady. Besides, you know who that is. That's Tala. He's not some renegade. He scouts for the army out of Fort Grant. Keeps to himself. He's never caused a lick of trouble. He's causing trouble now. Silas leaned over the desk, his voice a low, menacing growl. That woman represents a business contract, Brody. A deal. Her family might be broke, but their name still carries weight with some very important people I need to impress back east. This marriage was meant to legitimize my holdings, to give the Croft name a veneer of old-world respectability. Your inaction is jeopardizing my future. Brody leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking in protest. He knew exactly what this was about. It was never about Jedediah's happiness or Alina's safety. It was about Silas's naked ambition. It always was. This sounds like a Croft family problem, Silas, the sheriff said, his tone final. Don't you try to make it the town's? Silas's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Fine. If the law in this town is too cowardly to act, I'll hire men who will. He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving Brody sighing in the dim lamplight. The sheriff knew this was far from over. Silas Croft did not tolerate being defied. He owned this town, and he was about to remind everyone of that fact. Silas found his son Jedediah drinking himself into a stupor at the saloon. He looked up as his father approached, his handsome face flushed with whiskey and a toxic cocktail of defiance and shame. I trust you're proud of yourself, Silas said, his voice dripping with contempt. You've made a mockery of our name and thrown away the best chance you ever had. She wasn't for me, Jedediah slurred, gesturing to the bartender for another drink. Silas snatched the glass from his son's hand and smashed it against the back wall. The saloon went dead silent. This was never about you, Silas roared. It was about the family, about securing our legacy. What about Isabella? Jedediah's voice was suddenly sharp, cutting through the alcoholic haze. Did you really think I just cast her aside? The woman I love? For some package you ordered through the mail? Isabella. The name hung in the air like gun smoke. The saloon singer. Beautiful, fiery, and with a reputation as tarnished as the spittoons on the floor. She was everything a young man like Jedediah would desire, and everything a patriarch like Silas would despise. Silas's expression turned glacial. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only Jedediah could hear. Isabella is a momentary distraction, a whore who will be gone when her looks fade. The Vance girl was your future, but you've made your choice, and now you will fix it. Jedediah looked at him, confused. Fix it? What are you talking about? You will ride with the men I hire, Silas hissed. You will play the part of the grieving fiancé. You will show this town that you're going to rescue your poor, terrified bride from the clutches of a red-skinned savage. You will restore your own honor, even if you have to build it on a pile of lies. Jedediah stared at his father, horrified. You want me to hunt them? After I'm the one who drove her away? You will do it, Silas commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Or I will make sure your precious Isabella is run out of this territory on a rail, if she's lucky. I will see to it she never works in any saloon or cat house from here to California. I will ruin her. I will destroy her. Is that clear? The color drained from Jedediah's face. He was trapped. His one grand act of rebellion had only tightened his father's leash. He looked around the saloon, at the hard faces of the men who worked for his father, who drank his father's whiskey, who lived in his father's town. There was no escape. "Yes, father," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Silas nodded, satisfied. He strode to the center of the saloon, his voice booming for all to hear. "I'm paying $500 for the safe return of Miss Vance, and another $500 for the man who brings me the Apache, dead or alive." A murmur of greedy excitement swept through the room. $1,000. That was a fortune. Men who had been apathetic spectators just hours before were now eager participants in the charade. Among them was a man named Cole McCall, a notorious bounty hunter known for his ruthlessness and his particular hatred for Apaches. His scarred, cruel face split into a grin. He just found his next payday. Jedediah Croft, the Prince of Redemption Gulch, sat alone at his table, drowning in guilt and whiskey. He had rejected a woman to save the woman he loved. And now, to save the woman he loved, he had to hunt the woman he'd rejected. The bitter irony was a poison in his gut. He was about to become the hero in a story where he knew, with sickening certainty, that he was the villain. The days in the canyon settled into a strange and quiet rhythm. Alina's Boston dress was quickly ruined by the practical task of fetching water and gathering firewood, and wearing it felt like shedding an old skin. One morning she found a pair of soft buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt left for her outside the cabin door. They were boy-sized, probably Tala's from years ago. Wearing them felt both scandalous and incredibly liberating. For the first time she could move freely, climb the rocks behind the cabin, and feel the solid earth under her feet without the prison of a corset and petticoats. Words remained a barrier, so they learned to speak in the universal language of action and intention. He became her silent teacher. She learned by watching his hands, which plants were for eating and which were for medicine, how to read the subtle signs of the trail, a bent twig, a displaced stone, the faint print of a coyote's paw in the dust. He would simply point, and she would look, truly look, with an intensity she had never known she possessed. In return, she brought her own world into the tiny cabin. She found a piece of charcoal from the fire, and on a smooth, flat stone, she began to draw. She drew the tall ships her father had owned, the grand house in Boston with its manicured gardens, a flower her mother used to grow. He would watch her for hours, his dark eyes following the lines as they formed, a flicker of understanding, of shared humanity in their depths. One evening, as she was tending to a small cut on her hand, he noticed the jagged white scar on her forearm, a faint memory from a childhood of climbing trees. He reached out, his fingers tracing the old scar so gently it made her breath catch in her throat. It was an intimate gesture, a question asked without words. She touched the scar, then pointed to a tall, gnarled tree just outside the cabin, and mimed climbing and then falling, her face a mask of childish pain. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first she had ever seen, and it transformed his face, softening the harsh, stoic lines. It was there and gone in a second, but it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. Then his expression grew somber. He pulled up the sleeve of his own shirt, revealing a terrifying, puckered scar on his bicep, the unmistakable mark of a bullet wound. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a history she couldn't imagine. He then turned and knelt, and began to tell her his story in the dirt. He drew figures with a stick, a man, a woman, a child, a family. He drew a teepee beside them, their home. Then he drew other figures, men with hats and rifles, soldiers. He made a low, guttural noise in his throat, a sound that chilled her to the bone, the sound of gunfire. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, he wiped away the figures of the woman and the child, leaving only the man, alone. He pointed to the lone figure in the dirt. Then he pointed to himself. Alina stared at the tragic, simple drawing, her heart aching with a pain so profound it felt like her own. His silence. It wasn't a choice of culture. It wasn't stoicism. It was a prison, built from a trauma so deep it had stolen his voice, the family he had lost, the life that had been violently ripped away from him. She understood now. They were both survivors, cast adrift by forces beyond their control. She, by the quiet ruin of finances and social disgrace. He, by the loud, brutal violence of conquest. They were two sides of the same coin. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the drawing in the dirt. Then she did something bold. She took the stick from his hand and drew another figure, a woman in a dress, standing next to the lone man. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and whispered, "You are not alone now." He stared at the drawing for a long, silent moment, his jaw tight. When he finally looked at her, the mask was gone. In his eyes, she saw not the stoic warrior, but a man drowning in a sea of memory and grief. He gave a single, slow nod. It was a profound acknowledgement, a silent agreement that forged a bond between them far stronger than any spoken words ever could. A few days later, another discovery forged a new link in that chain. Alina was finally cleaning out her carpet bag, the last bastion of her old life. Tucked into a side pocket were the letters. The letters from Jedediah Croft that had brought her here. She pulled them out, the elegant, flowing penmanship a bitter reminder of the beautiful lies she had believed. She was about to toss them into the fire, to burn away the last remnants of her foolish hope, when Tala entered the cabin. He froze. His eyes were fixed on the envelope in her hand. He strode over, his movements sudden and urgent, and gently took it from her. He stared at the handwriting, a look of intense, almost shocking concentration on his face. He turned and walked to a small wooden chest in the corner, a place she had never seen him open. He lifted the lid and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a supply requisition form from the Army, written in English. He laid it on the table next to her letter. The handwriting was identical. Alina stared, her blood running cold. It was the same elegant script, the same confident loops and swirls. And at the bottom of the requisition form was a signature, a bold, arrogant scrawl she had seen on documents all over town. Silas Croft. It wasn't Jedediah who had written to her. It was his father. The entire courtship, every loving word, every promise of a new life had been a business transaction, a cold-blooded deception orchestrated by the old man. Jedediah's cruelty at the station, it wasn't just a whim. It was a desperate public rebellion against a fate that had been forced upon him, a fate that had included her as an unwitting pawn in his father's game of chess. Tala pointed from the signature on the form to the envelope from Boston, then looked at her, his expression grim. He knew that name. He knew that signature. He understood the depth of the betrayal. Alina sank onto the stool. The letters in the requisition form spread before her like pieces of a shattered life. The truth was so much uglier than she had imagined. She wasn't just rejected. She had been purchased. And the goods upon arrival were found to be unsatisfactory by the son, even though the father had already signed for the delivery. Tala placed a hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was solid, real. In a world of lies and manipulation, his silent presence was the only truth she could hold on to. He was no longer just her rescuer. He was her partner in this tangled, ugly web. As the sun set over the canyon, casting long shadows that looked like grasping fingers, Alina knew with a chilling certainty that the world they had escaped would not let them go so easily. Silas Croft was not a man to let his property, whether it was cattle or a mail-order bride, simply walk away. The confrontation was not over. It had not yet truly begun. The peace of the canyon was shattered by a sound that didn't belong, the clatter of a shod horse stumbling on loose rock. Tala heard it first. He went perfectly still, his head cocked, his entire body a finely tuned listening instrument. He put a single finger to his lips and motioned for Alina to get away from the fire. The scent of their wood smoke, which had been a comfort just moments before, had just become a beacon for their hunters. He moved to the edge of the canyon overlook, his body blending seamlessly with the rocks. Alina followed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the distance, snaking their way through the arid landscape like a venomous serpent, was a line of riders. A posse. Even from this far away, she could see the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. They had been found. Tala's face was grim but calm. There was no panic in his eyes, only a focused, calculating intensity. This was his land, his home. He was not the prey here. He was the master of this domain. He turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. He pointed to himself, then to the rocks and trails around them, a silent vow that he would protect this place, their sanctuary. Then he pointed at her, and then to a small cave system she knew was hidden behind a trickling waterfall deeper in the canyon. The instruction was clear. Hide. Stay safe. She wanted to argue, to say she would not leave him, but she saw the unshakable resolve in his face. Her presence would be a liability in a fight. Her safety was his priority. She nodded, her throat too tight for words, and scrambled toward the caves. As the posse drew closer, their voices carried on the wind, coarse laughter and greedy speculation about the $1,000 bounty. Leading them was the man with the scarred face, Cole McCall. His cruelty was a palpable aura around him. And riding reluctantly among them, his face pale and drawn, was Jedediah Croft. Seeing him there, a part of the pack hunting her, was a fresh betrayal that stabbed deeper than his initial rejection. Tala moved like a ghost. He wasn't preparing for a battle. He was preparing for a strategic defense. He dislodged a precariously balanced pile of rocks, creating a small landslide that blocked the easiest path into the canyon, forcing the posse to take a longer, more treacherous route. He used his intimate knowledge of the terrain to lead them on a wild goose chase, his tracks appearing and disappearing like a phantom's, drawing them further and further away from the cabin and the cave where Alina was hidden. Concealed in the damp coolness of the cave, listening to the frustrated shouts of the men echoing through the canyon, Alina refused to be a damsel in distress. Tala had taught her to be resourceful. She gathered smooth, heavy stones from the cave floor, a pitiful arsenal, but it was something. She was no longer a wilting lady from Boston. She was a woman of the canyon, and she would defend her home. The hunt stretched for hours under the blazing sun. McCall's frustration grew into a white-hot rage. "He's playing with us!" he roared to his men. "Spread out! Search every damn crevice! The first man to spot him gets a bonus 100 from me." Jedediah used the order to break away from the main group. Guilt was eating him alive. He had no desire to find Tala, and even less to find Alina. His only hope was to locate them first and somehow warn them, to atone in some small way for the nightmare he had helped create. He followed a small game trail, his eyes scanning the rocks, not for a target, but for a chance at redemption. And that's when he saw him. Perched on a ridge overlooking the whole scene, partially hidden by a cluster of junipers, was another rider. It was Sheriff Brody. He wasn't with the posse. He was shadowing them. A small, impossible flicker of hope ignited in Jedediah's chest. Brody wasn't on his father's payroll after all. He was a man of the law. Meanwhile, McCall, in his bloodlust, finally stumbled upon the cabin. "He's here!" he bellowed. "The fire's still warm!" The posse converged on the small dwelling, tearing it apart in their furious search. From her hiding spot, Alina could hear the sounds of destruction, wood splintering, pottery shattering. The violation of their small, peaceful home sent a wave of pure anger through her. Tala knew the time for evasion was over. He had to draw them away from the cave, away from her. He let out a sharp, piercing cry from a rocky outcrop high above them. The call of a hawk. It was a challenge. "There he is!" McCall screamed, firing his rifle wildly. The shot echoed through the canyon like a crack of thunder, the bullet sparking off the rock inches from Tala's head. The final confrontation had begun. The posse scrambled up the rocks, firing as they went, but Tala was in his element. He moved through the treacherous terrain as if it were a flat city street, a phantom of the canyon. He didn't fire a weapon. His goal wasn't to kill, but to neutralize, to survive. He used a length of rope to trip one of the horses, sent a small rock slide down to block a path, and disappeared into shadows only to reappear 30 yards away. He was leading them on a deadly dance. From her hiding place, Alina saw an opportunity. Two of McCall's men were trying to circle around to get a clear shot at Tala from behind. Their path would take them right below her cave. With all her might, she heaved one of the heavy stones she had gathered over the edge. It crashed down through the brush, startling their horses. One of the animals reared, sending its rider tumbling to the ground with a cry of pain. It was just the diversion Tala needed. He saw her act of defiance, and for a fleeting second, A look of fierce pride crossed his face. But the odds were still overwhelming. McCall, a relentless and experienced hunter, finally managed to corner him. He trapped Tala on a narrow ledge, with a sheer 100-foot drop on one side and the bounty hunter's rifle on the other. "Nowhere left to run, savage," McCall sneered, leveling his weapon. His scarred face twisted into a triumphant grin. "Stop!" The voice belonged to Jedediah. He had scrambled up the rocks, his face desperate and pale. "McCall, don't! This is wrong!" "Get out of the way, Croft!" McCall snarled, his eyes fixed on his prize. "This is between me and him." "No!" A new voice, clear and strong, rang out from across the small chasm. It was Alina. She had emerged from the cave, stepping into the open, her fear burned away by righteous fury. In her hand, she held the bundle of letters. "This was never a kidnapping," she declared, her voice echoing in the canyon. "This is about lies. This man, Tala, he saved me. He showed me honor when your town and your family showed me none. The man you should be hunting is Silas Croft." She held up the letters for all to see. "He's the one who wrote these. He's the one who bought me like property and deceived me. Jedediah, for God's sake, tell them. Tell them the truth." All eyes, McCall's, the posse's, Tala's, turned to Jedediah. He stood there, trembling, caught between the vicious bounty hunter, the woman he had wronged, and the silent warrior who had protected her. The weight of his father's threats warred with the sight of Alina's incredible courage. And in that moment, something inside him finally broke. "She's right," he said, his voice shaking but clear and loud. "She's telling the truth. My father arranged everything. I rejected her. I drove her away. She left with Tala of her own free will. This whole hunt, it's a lie." McCall stared at him in disbelief, his face contorting with rage. "I don't care about your family squabbles. I was promised a bounty and I'm collecting it." He swung his rifle back towards Tala. A single shot rang out, but it wasn't from McCall's gun. It came from the ridge above. The bullet kicked up a cloud of dust at McCall's feet. "Drop it, McCall!" Sheriff Brody's voice boomed with authority. "This is over. I've heard enough. You're hunting an innocent man on a fraudulent bounty, and that makes you an accomplice to a crime." McCall hesitated, his greedy eyes darting between Tala, the sheriff, and the $1,000 he was about to lose. In that split second of indecision, Tala moved. He lunged forward, not at McCall, but at the rifle, deflecting the barrel just as the bounty hunter, in a final act of spite, pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, screaming off into the sky. Tala used his momentum to slam McCall against the rock wall, disarming him with brutal, decisive efficiency. The fight was over. The posse, seeing the sheriff's intervention and hearing Jedediah's confession, lowered their weapons. Their loyalty to Silas Croft's money was no match for the authority of the law and the power of the truth. The echoes of the gunshots faded, leaving a ringing silence in the canyon. In that silence, under the harsh light of the Arizona sun, the truth was finally exposed for all to see. The ride back to Redemption Gulch was a slow, somber procession of truth. Sheriff Brody had Cole McCall tied to his saddle, the bounty hunter's face a thunderous mask of defeat. The rest of the posse trailed behind, ashamed, avoiding eye contact with Jedediah, who for the first time in his life rode with his head held high. Alina and Tala followed at a slight distance, the quiet space around them a world away from the turmoil they were riding back into. The town met them with stunned silence. The narrative Silas Croft had so carefully crafted, of a terrified bride stolen by a savage, was completely upended. The sight of Alina riding calmly beside Tala, followed by a disgraced Jedediah and an arrested McCall, told a story more powerful than any lie. The final confrontation happened right on the main street in front of the Grand Croft Emporium. Silas stormed out, his face apoplectic when he saw the procession. "Brody, what is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. "Where is the savage's body?" "The only man I'm arresting today is Cole McCall for attempted murder," Brody announced, his voice carrying down the street for all to hear. "And I'll be having a long talk with the territorial prosecutor about a man who offers a fraudulent bounty and incites a mob under false pretenses. Silas stared, speechless, as his own son dismounted and faced him. "It's over, Father," Jedediah said, his voice steady and devoid of its earlier weakness. "The lies are done." He looked past his father to the saloon doorway, where Isabella was watching, her face a mixture of fear and hope. He walked over to her and took her hand in his, a public declaration that left no room for doubt. "We're leaving," he told his father, his voice firm. "We're going to make our own way, somewhere far from your shadow." Before he turned to go, he stopped in front of Alina. "Miss Vance," he said, the words clearly costing him a great deal of pride, "I cannot apologize enough for my cowardice and my cruelty. You deserve so much better. I hope, I hope you find happiness." Alina looked at him, at the man he was finally becoming, and saw not an enemy, but another survivor of Silas's tyranny. She gave him a small, forgiving nod. "Go find yours, Mr. Croft." With a final, broken look at the crumbling empire he had built on a foundation of sand, Silas Croft watched his son, his heir, and his future walk away. The power he had wielded for so long evaporated in the dusty street, leaving him as nothing more than an old, defeated man. In the days that followed, Redemption Gulch began to see with new eyes. The true story spread like wildfire. Alina was no longer the pitiful, rejected bride. She was a woman of incredible strength and fortitude. And Tala, the silent Apache, was not a savage. He was a man of quiet, unshakable honor, who had stood against the town's most powerful citizen and won. Alina now had a choice to make. The world that had cast her out was suddenly eager to welcome her back. The sheriff offered her a ticket and safe passage back east. The church offered her a room and a respectable position, helping the minister's wife. But when she looked at the dusty street, the false-fronted buildings, and the judgmental eyes that were now filled with a grudging respect, she knew it wasn't her world anymore. Her home was a small cabin in a secluded canyon. Her peace was in the vast, wild silence of the wilderness. Her heart was with the silent man who had saved her in more ways than one. She found Tala by the creek at the edge of town, preparing to ride out. He watched her approach, his expression as unreadable as ever, but she had learned to see the questions in his eyes. "They want me to stay," she said, her voice soft. "They say I have a place here now." He simply looked at her, waiting, letting her make her own choice. "But my place isn't here," she continued, her gaze unwavering as it met his. "I don't belong in Boston anymore, and I don't belong in this town. I think I belong with you." It was a declaration more terrifying and more honest than any vow she might have made in a church. He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt, of fear, of coercion. He found none. He saw only the strong, resilient woman who had fought beside him, who had saved him as much as he had saved her. He extended his hand just as he had on the station platform that first day. This time, when she took it, it was not an act of desperation. It was a choice, a promise. It was the beginning of a life. Months later, the canyon was truly their home. The small garden she had planted was thriving with corn and squash. The cabin, once a bachelor's refuge, was now filled with the smell of her baking and the sight of his intricate wood carvings. They had built a new life from the ashes of their old ones. In the evenings, she would teach him to read and write, using charcoal on smooth pieces of bark. He was a quick study, his mind sharp and hungry for the knowledge that had been denied to him. He learned the shapes of words, the power they held to connect two worlds. One evening, as a cool breeze rustled the cottonwood leaves outside their door, she was pointing to the letters of her own name, which she had carefully written on a piece of slate. Alina. She said it aloud, slowly. "Alina?" He watched her lips move. He looked at the marks on the slate. A lifetime of willed silence, of trauma-locked words, fought against the powerful, human desire to connect. He took a deep, shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of his being. Then for the first time he spoke. His voice was rough, unused, like stones grinding together after a century of stillness. But the word was clear. It was perfect. "Alina." She looked up, her eyes flooding with tears of pure joy. It was more than just a name. It was a bridge built across an ocean of silence. It was the sound of his healing. It was the beginning of their future. It was a single, beautiful word that held the promise of 1,000 conversations to come, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound connections are forged not in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet, patient language of the heart. In the heart of the unforgiving West, a story that began with brutal rejection and public humiliation found its end in quiet triumph and profound love. It wasn't a tale of grand riches or sprawling empires, but of something far more valuable, the forging of an unbreakable bond between two outcasts who found, in each other, the home they had both lost. If this journey into the raw heart of the Old West moved you, prove it by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who appreciates tales of survival, justice, and unlikely love. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories that bring the past to life. Don't forget to click that notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.